In the vast timeline of human history, great civilizations rise. They build cities, forge empires, and write their stories in stone. We know their names: the Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks. We read their words, we know their kings, and we understand their wars. Their stories, though ancient, are not silent. But what happens when one of those stories simply stops? What if one of the largest civilizations of the ancient world, a true empire with millions of people, simply vanished? Not in a single fiery catastrophe, but in a slow, quiet fade, like a photograph left in the sun. An entire culture that at its absolute peak ceased to exist, leaving behind cities as large as any on earth, but no story, no legends, no histories, not even a name. Tonight, we are not looking at a kingdom that was conquered and absorbed. We are looking for a true ghost of history, a civilization that for nearly 4,000 years was so completely lost that we did not even know it had existed. Its cities, discovered by accident in the 1920s, revealed a society of staggering complexity, an empire covering nearly 500,000 square miles, larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. They built the world's first known urban sanitation systems. Their cities were laid out on precise grids. Their trade network stretched for thousands of miles. And yet we cannot read a single word they wrote. We do not know their leaders, their gods, or their beliefs. We do not know why they built these incredible cities, and we do not know why they walked away from them. This is the story of the Indus Valley Civilization. It is perhaps the greatest unsolved mystery in human history, the case of the lost empire that vanished, seemingly without a trace. If the quiet mysteries of the past are what you seek, subscribe to Sleeping History. We don't chase myths, we simply follow the evidence. Now let us begin our examination.
To understand why the Indus Valley Civilization is our subject, we must first establish a clear definition of the word lost. In history, lost does not simply mean old. The pyramids of Giza are old, but Egypt was never lost. Its history was passed down to us by the Greeks, by the Romans, and through the Old Testament. We knew the names of its pharaohs, like Ramses and Khufu, long before we could read a single hieroglyph. When we finally deciphered their language in 1822 using the Rosetta Stone, it was a translation of a known quantity. The monuments had been standing in the open for millennia, and the civilization's memory, while faded, had never been erased. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, we find a similar story. The great cities of Babylon and Ur were known to us from ancient texts. When archaeologists uncovered their ruins, they were confirming stories that had been told for 2,000 years. When the cuneiform script was deciphered in the 19th century, it gave us the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Code of Hammurabi, stories and laws that had direct, traceable influences on the cultures that followed. These civilizations are ancient, but they are not lost. They are the foundational, unbroken threads of our documented human story. The Indus Valley Civilization is different. It is not a thread, it is a void. Its lost status is not defined by its age, but by its complete and total erasure from the human record. When the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia were building their first dynasties, the people of the Indus Valley, or the Harappan civilization, as it is also known, were building cities that were, in many ways, superior. But when this civilization declined around 1900 BCE, it did not pass its knowledge, its language, or its memory to a successor. It vanished. There is no Epic of Gilgamesh for the Indus. There is no list of Harappan kings. There is no text, Greek, Persian, or otherwise, that speaks of this great empire, even as a legend. It was a civilization with an estimated population of up to 5 million people, a significant portion of the entire world's population at the time, and it was forgotten so completely that for 4,000 years no one knew it had ever existed. This brings us to the first and most important definition of lost: the undeciphered script. This is the central mystery. The Indus people wrote. We have found over 4,000 examples of their writing, mostly on small, square stone seals like this one. But we cannot read them. The script is pictographic, composed of symbols that are elegant and complex. But no one, from the first archaeologists who found them to the modern computer scientists running statistical analyses, has been able to decipher it. The inscriptions are a tantalizing mystery. They are also incredibly short, with an average of just 5 symbols. This suggests they may not be a written language in the way we think of it, like a letter or a history book. They might be family names, an accounting system, or religious dedications. The problem is, we don't know. Without a Rosetta Stone, a bilingual text that shows the Indus script alongside a known language, it remains a locked box. Compare this to Egypt. We could read Egyptian history because we found one slab of stone written in hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek. We had the key. For the Indus Valley, we have thousands of locks, but not a single key.
This silence is profound. It means we do not know what these people called themselves. Indus Valley Civilization is a modern, geographical label. Harappan civilization is named after Harappa, the first city discovered. Both names were given to them by us in the 1920s. We do not know their word for king, god, city, or water. We cannot hear their voice. This leads to the second definition of lost, the accidental rediscovery. The Indus civilization was not found because anyone was looking for it. It was found by accident. In the 1820s, a British explorer and deserter named Charles Mason was wandering through the Punjab region of modern-day Pakistan. He came across a large, high brick mound at a site he called Harappa. He noted the strange, ancient bricks, but assumed it was the ruin of a lost castle. Decades later, in the 1850s, the British were building the East Indian Railway. They needed ballast, crushed stone and gravel to lay the tracks on. Near the town of Harappa, the engineers John and William Brunton found the same massive brick mound. Seeing it only as a convenient quarry, they and their crews carted away millions of the ancient, uniform-sized bricks. They were, quite literally, grinding a 4,500-year-old city to dust to build a railway. They were destroying one of the most important archaeological sites on Earth without a second thought, because no one knew what it was. The Indus civilization was so lost that it was invisible, even as it was being dismantled. It wasn't until the 1920s that serious archaeology began. Under the direction of Sir John Marshall, an Indian archaeologist named Dayaram Sani began excavations at Harappa. At the same time, R.D. Banerjee, another archaeologist, was excavating a Buddhist stupa 400 miles away. As he dug down, he found strange seals and bricks beneath the Buddhist ruins. It quickly became clear that these two sites, Harappa and the new site, Mohenjo-Daro, or Mound of the Dead, were part of the same, previously unknown Bronze Age culture. In 1924, John Marshall formally announced the discovery of a new civilization. The news sent shockwaves through the historical community. It pushed the history of civilization in the Indian subcontinent back by thousands of years, proving it was as old as and a contemporary of Egypt and Mesopotamia. The Indus Valley civilization had been found, but its discovery only deepened the mystery. It had been lost not just in the ground, but lost from time. Finally, lost means a total cultural disappearance. When the Roman Empire fell, it was not lost.
Its language, Latin, became the root of French, Spanish, and Italian. Its laws became the basis for Western legal systems. Its literature was preserved by monks. Its legacy was adopted by the civilizations that came after. When the Indus Valley civilization declined, its core cultural traits vanished. Its great planned cities were abandoned. Its script fell out of use and was forgotten. Its system of weights and measures, its specific art styles, its vast trade network, all of it ceased. The culture that followed in the region, the Vedic culture, was a complete break from the past. The people of the Vedic period were pastoral, not urban. Their language, Sanskrit, has no clear, provable link to the Indus script. Their society, which became the basis for later Hinduism, was centered on oral traditions, not written ones. It seems the Vedic people who composed their foundational texts, like the Rigveda, had no memory of the great brick cities that lay in ruins around them. If they did not write about them. This is what makes the Indus Valley lost. It is a civilization that speaks to us only through its physical remains, its bricks, its beads, and its undeciphered symbols. It has no text, no name, and no air. It is a 4,000-year-old silence. As we move forward, this is the central problem we must face. Everything we think we know about this civilization is an inference, a guess based on silent stones. Now let us examine the first of those stones, the first clues that began this investigation.
Before the 1920s, the history of the Indian subcontinent had a clear, established starting point. According to the academic consensus of the time, civilization began with the arrival of the Vedic peoples around 1500 BCE. These were the people who composed the Rigveda, the oldest scriptures of Hinduism, in the Sanskrit language. The first cities in the region were thought to have appeared much later, and the first major datable event was Alexander the Great's invasion in 326 BCE. The timeline was neat, and it was accepted. Anything found in the ground was measured against this framework. There was no concept of an Indian civilization contemporaneous with Egypt and Mesopotamia, let alone one that might have been larger. The civilization was so lost that the first clues to its existence were not recognized as clues at all. They were dismissed as curiosities, or worse, as raw materials. The first clue comes from an unlikely source, not an archaeologist, but a British soldier and deserter from the East India Company named Charles Masson. In the 1820s, Masson was wandering through the Punjab. He was an adventurer and a numismatist, a coin collector. In 1827, he came across a massive, high mound of ancient bricks near the town of Harappa. He noted a ruinous brick castle of very remote antiquity. Masson, like all scholars of his time, had no framework for a 4,000-year-old civilization here. He was looking for things he already knew about. He speculated that this might be the ruins of Songala, the city of King Porus, who had famously fought Alexander the Great. He was trying to fit his discovery into the only story he knew. He was wrong, but he was the first European to document the site. His observations were published in 1842, and the clue was officially, though incorrectly, in the public record. For decades, it remained just that. The second clue was not so much found as it was destroyed. In 1856, the British were building the East Indian Railway, laying a line between the cities of Lahore and Multan. The engineers, brothers John and William Brunton, needed ballast, the crushed stone and gravel used to create a stable bed for the railway ties. Near Harappa, they found the same vast mound of bricks that Masson had seen. They did not see a ruinous castle. They saw a quarry. They noted the bricks were finely burnt and remarkably uniform. They were perfect for the job.
for the construction of approximately 100 miles of railway track. The Brunton brothers and their crews systematically dismantled the high-fired brick walls and structures of a 4,500-year-old city. Millions of artifacts, entire buildings, and layers of history were crushed and buried under a modern railway line. They were, quite literally, grinding a lost civilization to dust. During this demolition, the workers found small, strange artifacts. Among them were square stone seals, carved with intricate images of animals like a unicorn, a bull, and an elephant, and a line of symbols that looked like writing. The Bruntons found them curious, but had no context for them. The clue had been found, and it had been ignored. The third clue came from the first true archaeologist to examine the site. In 1872, Sir Alexander Cunningham, the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, visited Harappa. He knew about the railway quarrying and the strange seals. Cunningham collected more of these seals. He was the first to publish a drawing of one, bringing the undeciphered script to the attention of the academic world. But Cunningham, like Masson, was trapped by the accepted history. He too tried to fit the seals into the story of Alexander. When that failed, he made another guess. He suggested the script might be a foreign prototype for the later Brahmi script, the ancestor of modern Indian writing. He could not conceive that it was a unique, fully formed script from a civilization thousands of years older than anything he was looking for. He misjudged its age completely. By 1900, the clues were all on the table. There were vast, man-made mounds of uniform brick. There were strange stone seals with an unknown script. And there was a systematic record of academic confusion. The clues had been seen, but not understood. They were pieces from a puzzle box that no one knew existed. The world's understanding of history was so incomplete that it could not find a place for the Indus Valley. The clue remained a quiet, unrecognized anomaly for another 50 years, waiting for a discovery that would finally, and violently, rewrite the entire first chapter of human civilization.
The announcements made by Sir John Marshall in 1924 did more than just reveal a new city. They broke an entire timeline. The discoveries at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were not isolated curiosities. They were the first two data points in a pattern that, as it was revealed, would completely redraw the map of the ancient world. The true first clue, as we discussed, was the sheer, unrecognized presence of these sites. The scale of what was found is the central fact of this civilization, and it is a scale that is difficult to comprehend even today. First, there is the geographical scale. When we speak of ancient Egypt, we are speaking of a civilization that was, in essence, a thin, green ribbon. It was a kingdom defined by the narrow, fertile floodplain of the Nile River, hemmed in on both sides by uninhabitable desert. When we speak of Mesopotamia, we refer to the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. The Indus Valley civilization was not a ribbon. It was a continent. The territory it covered, defined by the discovery of its settlements and artifacts, is staggering. From its westernmost sites in what is modern-day Afghanistan, it stretches south to the coast of the Arabian Sea. It sweeps east across the entirety of modern Pakistan and deep into northwestern India, including the states of Gujarat, Haryana, and Rajasthan. At its peak, the mature Harappan phase, which we date from approximately 2600 BCE to 1900 BCE, this civilization covered more than 1.25 million square kilometers.
That is an area of just under 500,000 square miles. For comparison, this is an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. It is an area roughly twice the size of the state of Texas. It is larger than modern-day France, Germany, and the United Kingdom put together. This was not a small regional kingdom. This was an empire. And it was an empire of staggering diversity. Its people were not just river valley farmers. They were highland mountaineers in the Baluchistan hills. They were mariners and traders on the coasts of the Arabian Sea. They were urbanites in some of the largest, most sophisticated cities on the planet. This leads us to the second scale, the structural scale. The discovery in the 1920s was of 2 cities. Today, we have identified over 1,050 settlements belonging to this civilization. The map is not empty, it is dense. These sites are not all the same. They show a clear and complex hierarchy. There are thousands of small rural villages, the agricultural backbone of the society. Then there are larger fortified towns. And then there are the megacities. We have found at least 5 and possibly more major urban centers, each with tens of thousands of inhabitants. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are the most famous, but sites like Rocky Garhi, still under excavation in India, may prove to be even larger. The simple existence of this many settlements over this vast an area, all sharing the same artifacts, the same building materials, and the same script, tells us something profound. This was not a loose collection of tribes. This was an integrated, organized, and standardized system, a single social, economic, and possibly political entity. Third, we have the temporal scale. This was not a brief experiment. The mature Harappan phase, the peak of its urbanism and power, lasted for 700 years. This 700-year span is not an abstract number. It is the same amount of time that separates us today from the High Middle Ages, the era of cathedral builders and crusaders. The Indus civilization maintained its stability, its trade, and its urban culture for as long as the entire period from the signing of the Magna Carta to the invention of the smartphone. It was a permanent fixture of its world. It was a contemporary of the Old Kingdom of Egypt, meaning the Harappans were building their precise, grid-planned cities at the same time the Egyptians were building the Great Pyramids at Giza. It was a contemporary of the Sumerian city-states of Mesopotamia. But while Egypt and Sumer were, in many ways, rivals, the Indus civilization was a third, separate, and equally powerful center of gravity for the entire Bronze Age world. Finally, there is the most speculative but most human scale, population. We have no census. We can only make educated estimates based on the size of the settlements and the likely agricultural capacity of the land. The estimates, even at the most conservative end, are enormous. The major cities, like Mohenjo-Daro, likely housed 30,000 to 40,000 people. When you combine this with the other large cities, the hundreds of towns and the thousands of villages, the total population of the Indus civilization at its peak is estimated to have been as high as 5 million people. 5 million. The total population of the entire world in 2500 BCE is estimated to have been between 50 and 100 million people. This means that this single, silent civilization, this lost empire, may have constituted 5 to 10% of the entire human race. This is the scale of the unknown. It is not just a missing city. It is a missing civilization of 5 million people living in over 1,000 settlements across 500,000 square miles for 700 years. and they vanished from human memory so completely that for 4,000 years no one knew they were there. We did not know their name, their language, their leaders, or their fate. We only knew the empty brick mounds they left behind. Now, we must look at what was inside those mounds. What did the cities themselves, the first true urban planning in history, tell us about the people who built them?
When we excavate the ruins of an ancient city, a Rome, an Athens, or a Thebes, we find a biography. We find a small village that over centuries grew organically. Streets are chaotic, twisting and turning, following old footpaths or the whims of powerful rulers. We see grand temples and palaces built on top of old, simple huts. We see a city that evolved. The cities of the Indus Valley are not biographies. They are blueprints. What was uncovered at sites like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa was not the result of slow, chaotic growth. It was the result of a single, comprehensive, and staggering act of urban planning. These cities, built around 2600 BCE, appear to have been planned and executed from the ground up. They are laid out on a near-perfect grid system. The main streets are wide and run in straight lines, almost directly north-south and east-west, intersecting at perfect right angles. These main avenues created a series of rectangular city blocks. This is the same rational grid model that modern cities, like New York, would adopt over 4,000 years later. Every city, from the largest to the smallest town, followed the same general pattern. They were typically divided into two distinct sections. To the west, there was a smaller, higher mound. We call this the citadel. This was a raised platform built with millions of mud bricks, lifting it high above the surrounding plain. This is where the city's major public and civic structures were found. It was a place of importance, designed to be separate and, in many cases, fortified. To the east lay the lower town. This was the main residential and commercial area, where the vast majority of the population lived and worked. It was here, in this sprawling, orderly grid, that we find the true genius of the Indus civilization. It is a genius found in a simple object, the brick. Unlike the stone of Egypt or the mud brick of Mesopotamia, the Harappans had mastered the mass production of kiln-fired brick. These were bricks fired at a high temperature, making them waterproof, incredibly durable, and resistant to the elements. It is the only reason these cities survived to be found. And they were all the same. Across 1,000 sites spanning 500,000 square miles, the bricks are standardized. They follow a perfect ratio, 1:2:4. The height is the unit, the width is double the height, and the length is double the width. This standardization allowed for massive, fast, and incredibly strong construction using an interlocking pattern that modern masons still use. This uniformity was not just for show, it was for a purpose that reveals more about their mindset than any palace would. Water management. The Indus civilization had, without exaggeration, the most advanced public sanitation system in the entire ancient world. As we look at the lower town, we see that almost every single house had its own dedicated bathing area and its own toilet. These were not luxuries for the rich, they were standard features. The bathing platforms were built with the waterproof fired bricks. From these private bathrooms, terracotta pipes or brick channels built into the walls would carry wastewater away from the house. They didn't just dump it into the street. They connected to a larger, covered, subterranean sewer system. Every major street in Mohenjo-Daro had a central covered sewer running beneath it. Smaller drains from the houses fed into these larger drains, which then carried the city's effluent to soak pits or outfalls beyond the city walls.
The drains had gentle slopes to ensure water flow and were built with manholes and inspection points, implying a system of civic maintenance. Someone's job was to clean the drains. This is a level of municipal sanitation that would not be seen again in most of the world until the 19th century. While contemporary civilizations were building monuments to their gods and kings, the Harappans were building a world in miniature, a clean, orderly, and hygienic world for its citizens. And on the citadel, we find the pinnacle of this system, a structure known as the Great Bath. It is not a palace, it is not a tomb. It is a massive, meticulously constructed public tank. It measures approximately 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and 2.4 meters deep. It is built entirely of fired brick, with a floor and walls sealed with gypsum mortar and a thick layer of natural bitumen or tar to make it completely watertight. 2 sets of stairs descend into the pool. It was likely filled with water from a nearby well. Given its careful construction, its location on the citadel, and the presence of small rooms surrounding it, this was not a public swimming pool. It was almost certainly a place of ritual purification, a core element of a belief system we cannot read, but one that was clearly obsessed with the importance of water. This is the world they built, a world of grids, of standards, and of water. It is a society that prized order, hygiene, and civic engineering above all else. But this silent, orderly world also holds a great contradiction. We find the cities, we find the houses, we find the drains, but we do not find the people who ran them.
In the ruins of Egypt, we find golden masks. In Mesopotamia, we find grand victory stelae, carved reliefs of kings hunting lions. In Rome, we find marble busts of emperors. These artifacts speak of gods, of kings, and of empires. They are loud. In the Indus Valley, we find almost none of this. The silence of this civilization extends to its art. We have not found a single grand palace, no opulent royal tomb, no monumental statue of a king or a god. The artifacts that define this culture are not loud. They are quiet. They are the objects of everyday, ordinary life. And in their quietness, they tell us more than any golden mask could. They tell us not about a single king, but about 5 million people. The most common and perhaps most important artifact is standardization. We find pottery, kilotons of it. It is well made and functional. Much of it is mass-produced, turned on a potter's wheel. The dominant style, known as red and black ware, is found across the entire civilization. A pot in Harappa looks just like a pot in Mohenjo-Daro, 400 miles away. This uniformity speaks to a shared culture and a massive integrated economy. But the most profound example of this standardization is not the pottery, it is the weights. Across the Indus Valley, archaeologists have found thousands of small, precision-cut cubes of a hard stone called chert. These are unambiguously a standardized set of weights and measures. They are beautiful in their simplicity. They follow a remarkably consistent system. The smaller weights are binary, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. The larger weights are decimal, increasing in multiples of 10. The base unit, weighing approximately 13.6 grams, is found in the ruins of almost every settlement. This is not a small detail. This is the foundation of their entire world. It means that a merchant in a small village on the coast of the Arabian Sea used the exact same system to weigh grain as a merchant in a massive city 500 miles inland. This implies a powerful, central regulatory authority. It speaks to a society built on trade, commerce, and a concept of fairness. For the average Harappan, this system meant that when you bought your daily portion of barley, you knew you were getting what you paid for. This commercial urban life is also reflected in the most famous of their artifacts, the seals. We have found thousands of these small, square stone seals, usually about 1 inch by 1 inch. They are carved with incredible skill, depicting animals both real and mythical. The unicorn is the most common, but we also see bulls, elephants, and rhinos. Above the animal, there is always a short line of the still undeciphered Indus script. These were not decorations, they were practical tools. They were pressed into wet clay, which was used to seal bundles of goods, or perhaps to mark the doors of storehouses. Each seal is unique, likely representing a merchant, a trading family, or a guild. They are the personal signatures, the company logos, and the administrative stamps of a complex economy. When we move from commerce to the personal, we find a people who valued adornment. We find vast quantities of jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, and anklets. This was a society that loved beads. They were made from terracotta, shell, bone, and semi-precious stones. The most prized was carnelian, a deep reddish-orange stone. Harappan craftspeople were masters of their trade. They developed a technique to drill extremely long, thin holes through these hard carnelian beads. These beads were a high-status luxury item, and they were their primary export. Harappan carnelian beads have been found in the royal tombs of Mesopotamia, a clear, tangible link between these two great civilizations. We also find figurines, thousands of them, made of terracotta. The vast majority are of animals, particularly the zebu bull, but many are female figures. These figures are often described as mother goddesses. It is important to state that this is an interpretation. We do not know what they meant to the people who made them. They are almost always female, often with elaborate fan-like headdresses and applied jewelry. They are found in great numbers, not in temples, but in private homes. This may suggest a domestic, household-based form of ritual or belief focused on femininity or fertility. But like everything else, their true meaning is silent. Finally, we find the most human objects of all. We find toys. We find small baked clay carts, some pulled by tiny oxen. We find animal figures with heads that bobble on strings. We find small grooved tracks that are likely game boards, and we find sets of dice. We find small clay whistles, still capable of making a sound. These objects, more than anything, bring this silent world to life. They are a world in miniature. They tell us that in these clean, orderly, and standardized cities, there was time for leisure, there was time for play, there were children. The artifacts of the Indus Valley do not show us a king, they show us a people of order, of trade, and of craft, a people who built a world of remarkable complexity, and then, for reasons we have yet to understand, left it all behind.
We have walked the grid-planned streets. We have seen the standardized bricks, the public baths, and the household drains. We have examined the artifacts, the weights, the beads, and the children's toys. We have, in effect, explored a perfectly preserved, silent stage. But the actors are missing, and the script is unreadable. This is the great silence. It is the most defining and frustrating aspect of the Indus Valley civilization. It is a silence that comes in two forms, one literal and one cultural. The literal silence is the script. As we have seen, the Harappans wrote. We have over 4,000 artifacts, mostly small, square stone seals, bearing their unique system of writing. We can see it. We can catalog it. We have identified approximately 400 unique, distinct symbols, but we cannot read a single word. The Indus script remains one of the last major undeciphered writing systems of the ancient world. The reasons are multiple,
and they create a perfect wall of silence. First, and most importantly, we have no Rosetta Stone. The original Rosetta Stone allowed us to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics because it presented the same text in 3 scripts, one of which, ancient Greek, we already knew. We have found no such bilingual or trilingual artifact for the Indus. No trade tablet, no monument, no letter that was written in both Indus script and a known language, like Mesopotamian cuneiform. Second, the inscriptions are incredibly short. The average text length on a seal is just 5 symbols. The longest, found on a signboard at the city of Dolavira, is only about 26 symbols. This is a profound problem. It is nearly impossible to find patterns, grammar, or syntax in such short, repetitive fragments. This brevity has led to a deep academic debate. Is it even a language? Some scholars argue that yes, it is a logosyllabic script, like Sumerian, capable of writing full sentences, and we just lack the key. Others argue for a more sobering reality. They suggest it may not be a true language at all, but a non-linguistic system. It might be a system of symbols for families, clans, or guilds, a set of religious or ritual symbols, or an accounting system of commodities. In this view, the seals are not writing so much as they are labeling, like a modern-day coat of arms or a corporate logo. The result for us is the same. The silence is total. We do not know what they called themselves. We do not know what they called their great cities. We do not know their word for king, God, mother, or water. Their voice is gone. This leads to the second cultural silence. When we look at Egypt, we see the pharaoh. We see giant statues of Ramesses II. We see tombs filled with gold. When we look at Mesopotamia, we see victory stelae, carvings of kings leading armies and slaughtering their enemies. These cultures were loud. They used art and architecture to proclaim, in no uncertain terms, I am the king, I am great, I am a god. In the Indus, we find this. It is called the priest king. It is perhaps the most famous human figure from the entire civilization. It is calm, robed, and formal. It is also 17.5 centimeters tall, about 7 inches. It was found not in a palace, but broken in the lower town of Mohenjo-Daro. We have no idea if he was a priest or a king. He might have been a respected craftsman or an ancestor. This small, ambiguous, and dignified statuette is the closest thing we have to a portrait of a ruler. There are no palaces. There are no royal tombs. There are no grand temples. The Great Bath is a public work, but it is not a monument to an individual. The Mother Goddess figurines are found in homes, not in great cathedrals. The city walls are defensive, but we find no art celebrating war, no carvings of conquered peoples. We find very few weapons. This is the cultural silence. It is an impersonal civilization. It is a society that, in its art and architecture, chose to celebrate community and order over the individual. The power structure is invisible to us. Was this a republic of city-states run by committees of merchants? Was it a peaceful priesthood that ruled through ritual? Or was it an empire so absolute, so standardized, that the rulers did not need to proclaim their power on giant statues? We do not know. The great silence leaves us with a civilization that is anonymous. We see the body, but the mind is gone. But they were not alone. This silent empire was part of a noisy, interconnected world. And while they left no records of their own, their neighbors, for a brief time, spoke of them.
The Indus civilization was silent, but it was not alone.
It was a central hub in a vast, interconnected Bronze Age world. While its own script is a locked box, we can, for a brief historical moment, hear its echo. We can hear it in the records of its loudest, most prolific neighbor, Mesopotamia. While the Harappans were building their orderly, grid-planned cities, the Sumerians and Akkadians were building their own empires between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And unlike the Indus, the Mesopotamians wrote everything down. They used a cuneiform script on durable clay tablets to record their histories, their myths, and, most importantly for us, their economy. Before we look at their words, we must look at the physical evidence, which is undeniable. Archaeologists excavating in Mesopotamia, particularly at the Royal Cemetery of Ur, the opulent burial ground for Sumerian royalty, found artifacts that were clearly foreign. They found distinctive, long barrel-shaped carnelian beads, etched with a specific acid technique. They found square, stamp seals that were not the local cylinder seals. They found weights based on an unfamiliar standard. For decades, the origin of these items was a mystery. But when the Indus civilization was discovered in the 1920s, the match was immediate and perfect. The carnelian beads from the tombs in Iraq were identical to those being mass-produced in the workshops of the Indus Valley. The weights matched the Harappan standard. The strange stamp seals were Indus seals. This was physical, tangible proof of long-distance maritime trade. Indus merchants were moving luxury goods over 1,500 miles from their home rivers out into the Arabian Sea, through the Persian Gulf, and up to the docks of the great Mesopotamian cities. This is where the texts pick up the story. Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets, dating from around 2350 BCE, speak of a globalized economy. They record trade with three great lands at the edge of their known world: Dilmun, Magan, and Meluha. Dilmun is now widely identified by scholars as the island of Bahrain, a key, prosperous middleman in the Gulf trade. Magan is believed to be the coast of modern-day Oman, a source of copper. And Meluha, the most distant, most mysterious, and wealthiest of the three, is what scholars now almost universally identify as the Indus Valley civilization. The Mesopotamians wrote of Meluha as a distant, exotic land of wonders, and they wrote about it by name. The most famous echo comes from one of the world's first empire builders, Sargon of Akkad. Around 2300 BCE, Sargon boasted in one of his inscriptions, quote, "At my anchor in the capital of Akkad, ships from Meluha, ships from Magan, and ships from Dilmun moored in the great docks of my city." This is not a myth. It is a direct economic and political statement. Sargon is bragging that his capital, Akkad, was so powerful that it was the final, premier destination for the most valuable trade in the world. He is telling us that ships built and crewed by Indus peoples sailed directly to his docks. Other texts fill in the details. Gudea, a ruler of the city of Lagash, recorded that he imported carnelian from Meluha to build a temple. The texts record what Meluha exported: vast quantities of valuable timber like teak and rosewood, gold, copper, ivory, and those distinct carnelian beads. We even have records of Meluhan villages in Mesopotamia, trade enclaves where Indus merchants and translators may have lived. But this echo is profoundly one-sided. While we find thousands of Mesopotamian texts mentioning Meluha and Indus artifacts in Mesopotamia, we find almost no corresponding echo in the other direction. Archaeologists in the Indus Valley have found very, very few Mesopotamian artifacts. A handful of cylinder seals, a few fragments. There is no widespread adoption of Mesopotamian culture, writing,
or art. This tells us something critical. The Indus civilization was not a passive partner. It was a massive, self-sufficient, and perhaps even insular economic power. Its people were sailing to Mesopotamia and trading on their own terms, providing luxury goods that the Mesopotamians craved. But it seems the Harappans, in return, desired very little from Mesopotamia. Perhaps perishable goods like wool, or raw materials like silver, that do not survive well in the archaeological record. For a few centuries, this echo is clear. We hear the name Meluhha spoken in the palaces of Sumer and Akkad. And then, around 2000 BCE, the echo fades. The texts stop mentioning Meluhha. The Indus artifacts stop appearing in Mesopotamian ruins. The trade, it seems, simply stops. The great engine of the Indus civilization was beginning to slow down.
For 700 years, the Indus civilization was a model of stability. Its cities were clean, its trade was orderly, and its standards of bricks, of weights, of civic life were upheld across 500,000 square miles. It was a vast, complex, and predictable machine. And then, around 1900 BCE, that machine began to break down. The end of the Indus civilization was not a single fiery event. There was no volcanic eruption, no known asteroid strike, no single battle that brought the walls crashing down. It was, instead, a systems collapse. It was a slow, quiet, and irreversible hollowing out that took place over generations. The evidence for this decline is not a story of war, but a story of neglect. We see it first and most clearly in the great cities. The great city of Mohenjo-Daro, once a masterpiece of urban planning, began to decay from within. The strict, orderly grid system was abandoned. New, shoddier houses were built on top of the old avenues, blocking the main streets. The complex subterranean drainage system, the city's greatest achievement, was not maintained. Drains clogged, and as they failed, they were simply built over. Wastewater that had once been channeled away from homes now likely ran in the open, in the newly narrowed alleys. The Great Bath, once a center of civic or ritual life, fell into disuse and was filled with debris. The grand single-family courtyard houses were subdivided. Crude brick walls were put up to partition large rooms into smaller, cramped tenements. This was no longer a city of proud citizens. It was a city of squatters, living in the shell of a forgotten greater age. This urban decay was a symptom of a much larger systemic failure. The glue that held the entire civilization together was dissolving. The artifacts of standardization vanished. The small square seals, the signatures of a vast trade network, stopped being produced. The Indus script which they carried disappeared. The last faint voice of the civilization went silent forever. The standardized cubical chert weights, the very foundation of their fair and orderly economy, vanished from the archaeological record. The mass-produced uniform pottery was replaced by cruder, localized styles. The long-distance trade with Mesopotamia, the Meluhha connection, ceased. The echo from their neighbors was gone. This was not a civilization being conquered. It was a civilization forgetting itself. But the people did not vanish. They moved. This is perhaps the most important finding. The decline of the Indus was not a mass die-off. It was a mass migration. As the great urban centers in the core Indus Valley, cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, emptied out, new, smaller, and more numerous settlements began to pop up elsewhere. There was a clear and massive population shift away from the Indus River and toward the east, into the Ganga-Yamuna River basin, and to the south, in the region of Gujarat. It was a process of de-urbanization.
the people abandoned the complex, integrated city life and reverted to a simpler, more localized and rural existence. The great single empire fragmented into 1,000 smaller, local cultures. For a long time, the dominant theory was that this was a violent end. An Aryan invasion, proposed by archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler, claimed that nomadic Sanskrit-speaking tribes from the north swept down and destroyed the cities. This theory was based on a small group of skeletons found at Mohenjo-Daro, which he interpreted as a massacre. This theory is now, by widespread academic consensus, disproven. The skeletons were not from a single event. The cities show no evidence of wide-scale burning or warfare. And most importantly, the timeline is wrong. The Indus civilization was already in a state of terminal decline, and its cities were virtual ghost towns centuries before the Vedic culture became dominant in the region. There was no sudden end. It was a long twilight. By 1300 BCE, the Harappan civilization was gone. The cities were empty, their bricks being buried by the sand. The system was broken. The silence was complete. We are left with the final and most profound question. Why? What could cause an entire civilization, so vast, so stable, and so advanced, to simply unravel?
The narrative of a civilization destroyed by nature is a powerful one. It is a story of victimhood, of a people helpless against a greater force. But there is a second, more complex set of theories. This is the human element. For many decades, this human element was defined by a single, dramatic, and violent story. It was the story of an invasion. In the 1940s, the archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler was excavating Mohenjo-Daro. In the city's final decaying layers, he found several groups of skeletons, men, women, and children who had not been formally buried. They were found in a street, in a room, and in a stairwell, in contorted positions. From this, Wheeler crafted a compelling, cinematic theory. He combined this discovery with the Rig Veda, the ancient texts of the Vedic peoples, which described their god Indra as Purandara, the fort destroyer. Wheeler proposed that the Indus civilization was violently overthrown by Aryan invaders, nomadic warriors from the north, who massacred the population and left the cities in ruins. It was a simple, powerful, and complete explanation. And for decades, it was taught as fact. Today, that theory is, by wide and overwhelming academic consensus, disproven. The narrative, while simple, does not fit the facts. First, the timeline is wrong. The great cities of the Indus were already in a state of terminal decline and had been mostly abandoned for centuries before the Vedic culture, with its Sanskrit language, became dominant in the region. The invaders, if they came, would have found virtual ghost towns. Second, the evidence of violence is wrong. Wheeler's massacre skeletons, when re-examined, show no signs of weapon-based trauma. They are, most likely, the unfortunate victims of a local tragedy in a dying, lawless city, perhaps disease or a bandit raid, who were left unburied. Across the 500,000 square mile empire, there is no evidence of a systematic, city-ending invasion, no great battles, no vast layers of ash and destruction, no smashed city gates. The Aryan invasion is a myth. But this does not mean the human element was absent. The true story, suggested by newer, more careful science, is not of an external war, but of an internal collapse. The most compelling human theory has nothing to do with invaders and everything to do with disease and internal violence. Bioarchaeologists have, in recent years, studied the skeletal remains from this final post-urban phase and they have found a story far darker than Wheeler's. As the cities began to fail, as the climate shifted and the trade networks broke down, life for the people inside them became unbearable. The evidence is written on their bones. We see a significant increase in infectious diseases. As the sanitation systems failed and the population was under stress, leprosy and tuberculosis, diseases that thrive in conditions of social and environmental strain, became rampant. We can see the lesions and decay they left on the skeletons. And we see violence, not the violence of a single invading army, but the chaotic, desperate violence of a society breaking apart. Analysis of skulls from the late period shows a dramatic increase in cranial trauma, blunt force injuries to the head. This violence was not evenly distributed. It was highest in the most vulnerable communities, in individuals who were buried outside the formal city cemeteries, in what seemed to be marginalized, slum areas. This was not a war. This was a social breakdown. It suggests a world where the central authority, the calm, organizing force that kept the drains clean and the weights standardized, was gone. In its place, resources became scarce. Social hierarchies, once invisible to us, may have become rigid and brutal. The civilization was not conquered, it ate itself from within. This is the human element. It is not an invasion. It is the story of a society under unbearable stress, from the environment and from its own failing economy. It is the story of disease, of social stratification, and of a slow, desperate internal collapse. The people who left the cities were not fleeing an army. They were fleeing a failed state. They were walking away from a world of disease, scarcity, and violence, seeking a simpler, rural, and safer existence.
The end of a civilization is rarely a single moment in time. It is a process. For the Indus Valley, this process was not a sudden night, but a long twilight. This was the period after the collapse, a slow fading that lasted for centuries, from roughly 1900 BCE down to 1300 BCE. This twilight is defined by two main themes: dispersal and dissolution. First, dispersal. As we established, the people did not vanish, they moved. The collapse of the great cities was not a die-off, but the beginning of a mass migration, a hollowing out of the old urban core. The great metropolises of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, once home to tens of thousands, emptied out. They were left to the wind, to the squatters, and finally to the encroaching silt and sand. They became, in effect, the mounds of the dead that their modern names imply. The people who left them, carrying what they could, did not travel far, and they did not stay together. They scattered. Archaeological surveys show this migration clearly. The population of the core Indus River Valley decreased dramatically. At the same time, the number of new, small, rural settlements increased to the east, toward the Ganga-Yamuna River Basin, and to the south, in the regions of Gujarat and Rajasthan. The people were fleeing a failed centralized system. They were trading the complex, anonymous, and now dangerous city life for a simpler, more manageable, and familiar existence as farmers and herders in small villages. This dispersal led to the second theme, dissolution. The long twilight is the story of a great unified system breaking apart into 1,000 local pieces. The idea of the Harappan civilization, its integration, its standards, its shared identity, simply dissolved. We call this the late Harappan or post-urban phase, but a more accurate term might be the localization phase. The great 500,000 square mile network was gone. In its place, a mosaic of small regional post-Harappan cultures emerged. In the north, near Harappa, we find what is called the Cemetery H culture, named for the unique new style of burial pottery found there. In the south, in Gujarat, sites like Rangpur show a similar story, a continuation of some Harappan-like traditions, but in a much poorer, simpler, and purely local form. And in this dissolution, the defining achievements of the Indus world were lost one by one. The script, the first and most definitive casualty, vanished completely. The seals were no longer made. The writing system, which had been used for centuries, was not simplified or adapted. It was abandoned. With its disappearance, the institutional memory, the administrative knowledge, and the very voice of the civilization went silent forever. It is a cultural loss so total, it is difficult to comprehend. The standardized weights and measures, the foundation of their integrated economy, disappeared. Trade reverted to local barter, and the concept of a pan-Indus economic zone was gone. The urban planning, the grids, the drainage, the public baths, this knowledge was lost. The new villages were small, haphazard collections of huts. The engineering brilliance of the Harappan cities would not be seen again in the subcontinent for over 1,000 years. The art and crafts were lost. The mastery of carnelian bead making, the distinctive pottery, the enigmatic seals, all were replaced by simpler, cruder, local styles. The long twilight was, in essence, a simplifying. It was a massive technological and intellectual retreat. The people survived. Their genetic heritage and some of their agricultural practices certainly continued, becoming the bedrock for later populations. But the civilization, the complex, integrated, literate urban system, was gone. By 1300 BCE, the twilight had faded to dark. The great cities were just mounds. The script was forgotten. The civilization, as an idea, was now truly lost. It had left the stage of history and entered the silence of archaeology.
We began our examination with a simple question. What happens when a great civilization vanishes without a trace? We found our answer in the silt and sand of the Indus River Valley. We found a civilization that, at its peak, was the largest of the ancient world. It was a society of 5 million people living in over 1,000 settlements spread across 500,000 square miles. We found a world built not on the glory of kings or the worship of great monuments, but on a quiet, profound sense of order. We found standardized bricks, standardized weights, and a shared, complex system of urban sanitation that would not be seen again for 4,000 years. We found a world of trade, craft, and civic planning. And then we found the silence. We found a script that we cannot read. We found cities without palaces and a people without a name. We found an empire that left no royal tombs, no grand statues, and no texts to tell us why. The end of this world was as quiet as its artifacts. It was not a single violent conquest. It was a slow systems collapse, a long twilight of de-urbanization. It was a civilization that, facing a changing environment and its own internal decay, simply dissolved. Its people walked away, their shared identity, their engineering, and their written language all dissolving back into a simpler, localized, rural existence. The Indus Valley civilization is perhaps the most profound counter-narrative in human history. It proves that a civilization can be vast, complex, and successful without conforming to our ideas of kings, gods, and empires. It also stands as a silent testament to the fragility of complexity. It is a reminder that nothing is permanent. An entire civilization,
representing perhaps 10% of the human race, can build a world of staggering sophistication and then be forgotten so completely that for 4 millennia, no one even knew it was missing. We are left with the greatest unsolved mystery in history. We have the bricks, the beads, and the bones, but the story, in their own words, is gone. We are left only with the silence.